I'm Matthew Lewis. I am Director of Communications for California YIMBY, which stands for Yes in My Backyard. We're a statewide housing policy and advocacy organization. We have about 80,000 members all over the state of California, and we work mostly in Sacramento with the state legislature to make it easier to build homes in the communities where we need them. The challenges in housing in California actually go back about 100 years. It started with efforts actually in the city where I live, Berkeley, during the Great Migration, when Black people were leaving the South and going to cities all over the Northeast and the North and the Midwest, but also out to California. The city of Berkeley, and also there was a huge and growing Asian population, Latino population sort of coming into our urban areas at that time. The city of Berkeley was very concerned about the impurity of a diversifying population. So they passed what were, in fact, the first zoning restrictions in the United States. And they did it with the intent of protecting white neighborhoods from the intrusion of unwhite people. That was in 1916. So it's the very first instance of zoning regulations in the U.S. was there, and it was done specifically to keep the community white. Those rules spread all over after that. And sort of you had a series of Supreme Court cases that sort of said that's okay before the civil rights movement. Starting in the 1950s, of course, the civil rights movement started to sort of push back against this, the Jim Crow laws that took off all over the country, basically redlining. And these zoning restrictions were a form of Jim Crow in the North and the West, separate but equal. People think that that was something that only happened in the South in the United States, but in fact, our housing policy shows that it was really everywhere that we did that. So in the 1950s, with the advent of the civil rights movement, you started to have a lot of pushback against that. And then finally, with the passage of the Civil Rights Act and a series of other decisions in the courts, it was declared illegal. So you could no longer discriminate in housing. The Fair Housing Act and a series of other laws that were passed said, nope, you're not allowed to make a community only white. You can't have anything on the deed that says no Jews, no Asians, or no Blacks, which are actually still on the deeds of a lot of properties, but they've been invalidated by law. The heirs, the sort of inheritors of that original racist zoning policy, came up with a new strategy. And what they said was, since we can't use zoning to restrict a neighborhood by race, what we will do is use zoning to restrict housing altogether. And so you had a wave of down zonings that swept across the United States. The most egregious example that we point to is Los Angeles. So in 1964, the city of Los Angeles had a zoned capacity, I'll come back to what that means, of 10 million people. So what it meant was, on the map in the city of LA, you could legally build housing for a population of 10 million people. Okay? That was legal in 1964 in LA. Over the next 10 years, through a series of down zonings, they reduced that capacity to 4 million people. So they wiped out the legal ability to build housing for 6 million people in Los Angeles, just erased it from the map. Because what they said was, we can't make it racially focused, but what we can do instead is just eliminate the housing altogether. So you have these down zonings that sweep across the country. And the theory behind the down zonings, and these weren't kept secret. I mean, these people were very open about their intentions at the time. Because of the history of redlining and exclusionary zoning, where you said literally you can't have Jews, Asians, or Blacks, what happened was a pattern of immigrants and Black people leaving the South who had less money because they're coming to the country for opportunity, right? So they didn't have a history of family wealth. They hadn't built their wealth on the backs of slavery, literally, or whatever other means they might have. So you tend to have this emergent property of single family or single unit neighborhoods with predominantly white families. And then multifamily denser housing was diverse, Black, Asian, Latino. I'm Jewish. People are familiar with the Jewish ghettos. I mean, those were the places the immigrants would move because they couldn't afford the single family housing. So what these white exclusionary communities did very cynically was they said, well, if they can't afford to move into our single unit houses that we have in our city, then what we'll do is we'll make it illegal to build anything else. And it had exactly the same effect. It did exactly what they wanted it to do. So now when you go to communities such as Marin County, which has almost no multifamily housing throughout the county, it's 90% white. When you go to West LA, which is almost 100% zoned for single unit housing, it's like 75% white. So you see a correlation between what they were trying to do in 1916 by just saying overtly, you can only live here if you're white, and then pass through the civil rights era, and they shifted to, you can only live here if you're rich. They know it means the same thing. But of course, it became impolite to say that after the civil rights era. So they did it by another means. Pretty significant things that happened along the way here.